Right, excellent. So I just wanted to start by actually saying who are Scotland's farmers and crofters. And just for those of you in the room that don't know, it's 70% of Scotland's land mass is agriculture. So that means 70% of the land in Scotland is farmed by farmers and crofters. It means that they have an important role in terms of food production. It means they have an important role potentially in terms of managing a lot of the habitats and species that we value, because many of those are associated with some form of farming practice. And it also means that they have an important role to play in actually providing a wide range of other public benefits to us as wider society. And those public benefits are such things like water quality. So I don't know if you can see this very well. The map on the left-hand side is a map of Scotland. All that purple stuff, for those of you not familiar with Scotland, is upland or upland-type character. So a lot of it is upland. And the map on the right is water quality. The blues and the greens here are actually good water quality. All this mass of oranges and yellows round the bottom there is poor water quality. So water quality roughly segregates into an upland good, lowland bad. But a lot of what we've done in terms of trying to actually improve water quality in the lowlands is really been driven by regulation rather than positive payments per se. And possibly that's the way it should be. But in Scotland, we also have a big issue with regard to water quantity. So actually, a lot of our rain falls in the uplands and comes down. This is Dumfries, which is 35 miles some way that way, I think. This is Dumfries a couple of years ago. So big issues with actually water quantity. And so how we manage our waters and streams and rivers in the uplands can have a big effect on mitigating what actually happens lower down and where most of Scottish society actually lives. Wider countryside. So we've got big aspirations for climate change mitigation, aspirations for carbon sequestration, aspirations for actually mitigating flood lower down in our society. The purple, again, you probably can't see it very well on the map, but hopefully you can see it's relatively well distributed, is actually peatland areas across Scotland, or areas of deep peat across Scotland. We've got about 2 million hectares-ish of peatlands in Scotland, and about 60% plus of those peatlands are degraded in some way. They're not a good biodiversity ecosystem. They're actually excreting greenhouse gases up into the atmosphere, and they're actually friable, so soil is getting into the watercourses and making those watercourses less poorer quality. But restoring peatlands needs managers, needs people to actually do the restoration process, and just as importantly, maintain those peatlands once they have been actually restored. We have 18% woodland cover in Scotland, not very much. Most of that is plantation forestry, which I'll talk about in a second. Again, the purples on the map, for those of you can see them, in around here are native woodlands. The circles on the right-hand side are basically the amount of native woodland within each of those areas of Scotland. The orange segments are the proportion of native woodland that is poor for biodiversity in each of those areas. And you can see lots of big purple, lots of big orange blobs. A lot more could be done from a biodiversity perspective by managing our native woodlands a lot better. Managing being the key word, i.e. we need managers. And again, plantation forest, like it or loathe it, is actually worth £1 billion to the Scottish economy at the minute. It's employing about 25,000 people. It's actually a money earner. And as it was planted 40 years ago, it's not how it's being planted now. And we've got more scope to actually get more public benefit out of plantation forests going forward by actually planting them in a different way, in a different scope, in a different sort of composition. Again, planting means managers, managing them means managers, harvesting means managers. And biodiversity, you're all familiar with the sort of the crashes in biodiversity that we've actually seen. These are just some headlines that I've gathered together over the last few years. Since 1966, we now have 44 million less individual birds in in the UK. 72% of UK butterfly species are in decline. So again, we have big pressures on biodiversity, with much of that biodiversity being associated with farmland in some sort of shape or form, but also meaning that farming and farming practices can also actually be beneficial to biodiversity if we actually get it right. How have we been actually rewarding the delivery of public goods to date in Scotland, which is the question I was set? Not very well, actually, because most of how we've been paying for biodiversity management or water quality management has either been through regulation or has been through funding the individual sort of prescription type processes. Actually fence this riverside off and you will reduce the amount of pollution that's getting into the watercourses. Potentially, yes, you will. But there's no then subsequent payment to reward the farmers for doing that. Certainly, peatland restoration, although it's changing slightly, is one of those ones you'll pay for. A land manager will be paid to help do the peatland restoration to get it into good condition, but there's no subsequent payment after that to reward that land manager for keeping that peatland in that condition. And just as importantly, for agri-environment and many of the public good payments that we've actually got so far, if you were a land manager who hadn't damaged your watercourses, who hadn't damaged your peatlands, who hadn't destroyed the biodiversity in your farm, it's very difficult for you to get some form of public reward to date, because most of the payments to date have been going to pay for a change of a positive nature. So there's a variety of different ways we could try and actually pay for public goods delivery going forward, but I think very strongly that we should focus on the outcomes and not the process, because if we focus on the outcomes, that means people who are already providing it gets paid, as well as those who are willing to actually make some change. Don't know if that was 5 minutes. These are all the people that fund me, and that's all the stuff I do. It probably gives you... It's just no right-hand one.
Yes, yes. Can you hear me now? Okay, so somebody, Pete, you're going to tell me if I'm out of time. You'll wave at me, yes? Okay, I've only got ignore the slides, because the slides are, the slides are for my benefit, for reminders, really. So a very brief potted history. My name is Ruth Layton. I'm a veterinary surgeon by training. I qualified over 40 years ago. I can't believe it. Over 40 years ago, and I so buy into some of the things that the vets have said today, but we are standing up as a profession. It's taken us a while, but we're getting there, and we do want to help with this. Many of us do really want to help with this. So as a veterinary surgeon 20 years ago, I set up a business with 2 other people because I was disillusioned with being a veterinary surgeon. I didn't want to work in systems where animals got sick. What I wanted to do, I realised, took me a while, but what I realised I wanted to do was actually develop systems where animals didn't get sick. So we as a business focus on animal protein, and 95% of our business is aquaculture. So thank you for compassion to getting that on the agenda. It's been badly needed for a very long time. There's a lot of problems, and as a business, we're trying to help solve those. So what we did is we set up a business, and our initial part of the business was a consultancy with all those brands that keep coming up that you all love to hate. But if you're at the table, you have some influence. And so we've been working with McDonald's, for instance, for over 20 years. They do some good stuff as well as the bad stuff. Free-range eggs, RSPCA assured pork, lots of good stuff going on, and they can help. They can help. And some of the suppliers into these big food supply chains, the eggs into McDonald's come from a guy in the Lakes, a third of them, called Davy, and he's got one of the best free-range egg systems in the country. I would argue the best. But, you know, so some of the small farmers, we can organise ourselves so that we can supply into these big food supply chains. So we came up with this framework quite a long time ago because people understood it, that was all. There's lots of frameworks. So environment's obvious, economics is obvious, ethics is about people and animals. All sorts of people, all sorts of animals. So what we focused on is to pick up on the last speaker, you know, we focused on what do we measure. And sometimes, you know, in the work we do, it's like wading through treacle. But you guys want to do it, you want to demonstrate the good stuff you're doing. it's an open door. And the reason I like this methodology, I'll skip to the next slide. The reason I like this methodology is because it allows, this is my most important point. So if you're half asleep, oh God, you must be on information overload. I certainly am. But this is the most important point for me. This system of measuring, it allows us to compare across species, across geographies. A lame cow is a lame cow wherever she is in the world. And it's unacceptable to have lame and sick and injured cows with high levels of mortality and lumps and bumps on them. It's unacceptable. So we can use this system to compare. And so people like yourselves in the room, we work with the big food chains, and some of the results are okay and they're getting better, but the results that you guys would show would be way, way better. So we have some very, very difficult measures. Biodiversity is one. It's quite difficult to measure on large-scale, big food supply chains. Animal behaviour, which has come up a lot today, really difficult still. We haven't got good systems. I first saw Francois work 20 years ago, and I was completely blown away by it because I knew how exciting it was. But, you know, it's becoming sexy, but it's taken 20 years. And I think the other big point I want to make is these slides will be shared, won't they? So I'm not going into detail. It's on my previous slide. How do I go back up? Small groups of self-organising farmers, you've got the motivation. That's what I want to work with now. I want to bring all this knowledge that I've learnt over 20 years, and I want to work with small groups of self-motivated, self-organising farmers across the world. And there's a lot of them. There's a lot of them, and we can all join together and we can show that we can do what the planet so badly needs. I think that's all I want to say, really. Oh, now let's just do this. This is the M&S. Is this M&S? Yeah, this is an M&S supply. This is on the website. This is in public domain. But, you know, it's so simple, this system. We've got 5 measures: livability, disease, injury, mobility, behaviour. 5 measures, on-farm measures. And I'm happy to be challenged. And somebody said earlier, mortality is not very sophisticated. It's not of itself, but if you measure it at all stages in a production system, it tells you where you need to drill down and where the problems are. But, you know, if you looked at, I know David and Wilma's system quite well, the mortality would be good right across the system. Low, I mean, yeah, low. And the only other point I want to make there, sometimes these measures need to be used together. This looks simple. This is 20 years of quite hard thinking, reading research, iterative processes. So just simple things like you use disease measures. So antimicrobial use is one of the big ones. You use disease measures and mortality together. I can't tell you how many times we've worked with supply chains who get the message that they don't need to use antibiotics. So they tell their suppliers, don't use antibiotics, mortality goes up. We want low antibiotic use, we want low mortality, we want everything, and we can have it. We've just got to work together to do it. That's me.
Glasses here, if anybody's lost glasses.
Thank you. Good afternoon, everyone. I'm Adele Jones from the Sustainable Food Trust. I do also work part-time for DEFRA, but I'm very much here with my Sustainable Food Trust hat on today. And I want to build on the first 2 presentations talking about measuring public benefits in the context of harmonisation. As many farmers in this room will sympathise, there are so many audits out there, so many certification schemes, government grant applications, regulatory bodies, all in many cases overlapping, and actually in many cases also not, although you might get a tick in the box, phew, I'm organic again for another year, I've passed my inspection, doesn't necessarily tell you actually if you're any more sustainable than you were last year. And so Sustainable Food Trust has been, well, actually, sorry, I'll add to this. As well as these overlapping audits, we've now got to think about the new government schemes that will come into place. And apologies for using some DEFRA examples here, but obviously, post-EU exit, we'll need to develop a new regulatory baseline. We'll have some form of environmental audit. There's probably going to be an animal welfare audit, or controversially, we could even be thinking about working with the new CAP reform. So, Sustainable Food Trust has been looking at this problem, and we believe there is a case for harmonisation of the way we measure, value, and communicate on-farm sustainability. And the benefits of this, we feel, are obviously for farmers to help monitor and improve year on year in social, environmental, and economic terms. For government to better design and measure the impact of future public money support schemes. For food companies, obviously, to assess and communicate sustainability, and for citizens to better understand the sustainability of food products in the marketplace. I think it's becoming more and more clear that consumers don't understand what labels mean. And so if we can kind of bring about this harmonisation in the categories, the units of measure, and the language we all use around on-farm sustainability, we feel it could go a long way in helping consumers understand what they're buying and why. So we brought together a group of farmers and land managers about 3 years ago from all over the world, and all over the world, but also all over the country. And we started looking at some of the sustainability assessment tools that are out there and mapping them against some of the certification schemes. We found, I won't go into this, but we found that actually when you map all those things together, there was over 50% overlap of what those schemes require in terms of data or information. And so as a group, totally driven by the farmers, we sat down and thought, well, how can we pull together what's the best of already out there? What's already out there in terms of, like I said, categories, language, metrics. And we've come up with this harmonised framework of 10 or 11 categories, which measure the entire farming system year on year. And just taking one example, this is the same thing, just displayed in a slightly different way. You'll see we've got 11 categories there, each of which have 3 headline metrics under them. And taking the example of soil, you can see we've got 3 metrics: soil organic matter, infiltration rate, and biodiversity. And there's a mixture there of those. Biodiversity can be measured simple earthworm count in field, infiltration, simple stamp a drain pipe into the ground test in field. Soil organic matter, a little bit more difficult. Of course, you can send soil samples to a lab. Quite costly, quite time consuming. So we feel at the moment, examples like soil organic matter, you could use practices as a proxy for determining soil organic matter content if, let's say, government wanted to use soil organic matter percentages as a means of incentivising various practices under the public goods framework. And this is just an example of a second round of pilot studies that we've done where we looked at 3 different farming systems using the harmonised framework, matched them against each other in terms of scores, and that graph, the wider the lines, the higher the score. Just an example of where, by using such a harmonised framework that can be used across all sorts of different farming systems, you can benchmark against each other. And actually, the farmers in our group have found that to be hugely beneficial in terms of improving their practices. And why are we doing this? Obviously, our overarching objective is to try and shift the balance of financial advantage towards more sustainable production. Angela very kindly earlier mentioned our hidden cost of UK food report, which identifies where in the food system the externalities are not factored into the price that we pay at the till. And so we believe that if we can develop a harmonised framework of metrics and indicators and use that to try and monetise some of the damage caused, we can then help government design effective policy mechanisms to help incentivise the whole of the farming community towards more sustainable production, rather than the current kind of standards example where you take segregated aspects of the farming community and work with them in different ways. And these are just some examples of where we feel government could introduce policy measures based on such a harmonised sustainability audit, which we are suggesting Every farm in the country who wants to receive public money should do an annual sustainability audit based on harmonised metrics and language, and the results of that audit should determine how much money you receive from government year on year. And we believe that these might be some of the policy carrot and sticks that could help shift farming in a more sustainable direction. So whole farm-based incentives, soil carbon stewardship payments, potentially a nitrogen tax, a bit controversial, but I think it's important. Tax rates, investment incentives, and the American example of health insurance incentives I think is quite an interesting one. May not work here obviously, but I think it's useful to think of health in this context as well. So this is just a photo of us with our Secretary of State. About 18 months ago, we presented the progress of this project to him. He quite liked the idea. A couple of weeks later at the Oxford Farming Conference, he announced the need for a gold standard metric for food and farming quality, which would be based on a single basket of indicators. Hence my involvement in DEFRA now, working on that project, which, as you can imagine, is a little bit challenging, but I think exciting that it's even within the mix, actually. There's so many kind of actually quite brilliant things being developed at the moment, but there's a risk that if we don't think about harmonisation of the way that government measures things and then linking that to the market as well, it would just complicate things far more than is already the case. So the project next steps for us is to further refine the categories and metrics, and we're really wanting to hear from more farmers kind of their feedback on what we've done. It's definitely not the be-all and end-all. Be very happy to send the summary of metrics that I showed to anyone who's interested. Any feedback would be fantastic. We are doing a DEFRA ELM trial later this year, and in order to do that, we're considering developing an open source piece of farmer-friendly software, potentially in the form of an app. But again, very, very keen to hear any feedback of it from anyone who's used kind of similar apps or has got an app that might be suitable to kind of tag onto this. We're working with Sector Mentor for soils and also the RAU on this, but if anyone else has any ideas, we'd be delighted to hear, because the Sustainable Food Trust has no ambition to set up a new audit or a new scheme or a new app. We just want to catalyse what we believe the change that is needed. We're also doing some pilots in Australia and India and in the US. And I think that's me. Thank you.
Yep. Just press the. Cool. Yeah. Hi everyone. Thank you for staying to listen to me. It's great to be here. So today I was asked about how small farmers could send their story to the public and how they could get their goods that they're making on farm to the public. I'm afraid I trained as a mechanic and I'm not that bright, so I'm just going to tell you my story. As I said, I'm from Mossgiel Farm. We're a small batch dairy up in Ayrshire, and to give you a very brief history, in 1948 my grandfather signed the tenancy of Mossgiel, and in 93 my father took on the tenancy and grew their herd and grew their family on there, so we've had a sustainable business for about 70 years. And I came along in 2013 after we discovered that both my father and my grandfather had terminal conditions. As I say, I was a mechanic at Mercedes-Benz at that time. I had no idea of farming, hated the farm at the time, to be honest. And I came home to help out to sell the cows, fell in love with the place and decided to keep things going. So Mossgiel Farm, what is it? We are predominantly a dairy farm. We sell all of our milk directly to consumers, and we try to do things a little bit differently, as I'll explain. We supply, our main market is the specialty coffee industry in Glasgow and Edinburgh, and in fact right across the central belt of Scotland now. And we discovered that the milk worked very, very well in coffee, thanks to two members of the audience, Dan and Harry from McCune Smith in Duke Street in Glasgow, without whom we probably wouldn't have a business right now, so thanks very much. And we also supply all of the milk that we produce, also milk from two other farms in Ayrshire, entirely single-use plastic free as well, and have been for about 5 months now. We do this through vending machines right across Scotland and through glass bottles, which we deliver directly to consumers in Ayrshire, and also reusable tubs for the cafes and coffee shops across Glasgow and Edinburgh. So the idea itself, as I say, I came home from Mercedes-Benz to take over the business, which I knew nothing about. At the time, the farm had 150 cows. They were housed inside all year round. Each cow was producing about 38 litres of milk, so they were very high-yielding animals. And then, of course, straight after my father died and I was at the helm of this business, the milk price collapsed and plunged us into £110,000 of a loss in my first year of farming. So not sustainable at all at that point. And then ultimately our milk buyer, Swan Milk, went out of business and took with them 25 local farmers, and we were almost one of them. So we decided to head down to a local supermarket, myself and some friends within Swan Milk and other milk buyers, and took my tractor down, which was right there, out to the Asda at Kilmarnock. We took all the milk off the shelves, took it to the front door, and we told everybody we could that there was an issue with Scottish dairy, but we weren't being paid what we felt was fair. And we just really didn't know who to turn to and how to get value back onto our farm to try and survive. The biggest question we were asked at that point was, how do we support farmers? How do we support local producers? And me being there, I thought, you know, there is actually no way. There was no dairies in Ayrshire, there's very few small dairies in Scotland, and no one could really support the small farm. Round about that same time, I mean, to give you absolute honesty, when I was at Mercedes-Benz, I was running about eating fast food and processed food I could get off the shelf and stick in the microwave as quickly as possible. And I started to really think about where food was coming from at that time as well. So just to give you an example, this is a pizza that I picked up that night in the Asda protest. And it said on it the UK port was actually from Denmark, Germany or the Netherlands. And of course this was straight after the horse meat scandal. And I thought to myself, you know, if we don't really know where this food's coming from, do we really know that's even that food at? And I really started to do some research and do some look into what was happening. Of course, what's been mentioned a couple of times today is around about this time, which was 2015, that's when people started to really think about, you know, is the dietary guidelines we've been given for the past 30 or 40 years really the best, and what have we been doing? And of course, the same year, my son Aaron was born as well, and bringing a new life into the world and having £110,000 loss is not a great combination, so we had to really think differently. And of course, the thing that really got us going was the specialty coffee industry had really started to get traction and really started to move and do things differently. And it sort of gave us a focus on where we should be going. Now I'd love to show you this video, but I don't know if it's going to work. Oh, it is going to work. So can everybody see that okay? Is it worth me playing this thing? Yeah. So basically, just to explain this, as I said, our milk works very, very well in specialty coffee, and this is a comparison that was done 3 years ago. As you can see, the top cup, that's actually our milk, and the video was done over 7 minutes. Our milk's sitting perfectly still and doesn't grow any bubbles at all, and the milk there over 7 minutes is grown and deformed. Now, to give you a very brief explanation into what's going on here, within milk, when milk's being processed, it goes through a lot of different stages and a lot of different things happen to the milk. The proteins become destabilised, the fats get all mashed up and things all go wrong. And when you're trying to create a very high quality product as a barista, you find that the more natural the product is, the better it becomes. So if you go and drink a specialty coffee that's been lightly brewed or medium roasted and carefully brewed, you'll taste a lot of very different flavour. It becomes very nice and very enjoyable. If you go to a very cheap supermarket coffee that's been instantly frozen, you know, you've not got that quality there. It just tastes like pretty bad coffee, really. So it was something that we really got interested in, and we started to look into why this was happening. So that's when I discovered this, which is a process flow for a major dairy in the UK. So just to very briefly explain what it is, I know we don't have much time. Raw milk is collected from the farm. It's mixed together in a massive tanker of about 30,000 litres between various different farms in that area. It's taken into the dairy, it's mixed together again into massive silos, then it's fired through a separator to take all of the fat out of the milk, and then there's two different products. You've got skim milk and you've got cream. So your cream goes along and it makes various different products, as does your skim milk. Some's mixed back together to create whole milk, semi-skimmed or skim milk, etc. And by the end of it, it's been separated, it's been pasteurised, it's been homogenised, it's been through various different stages. At the end of it, you've really got white water as milk, or various different products which have been processed on a massive scale to try and obviously make things as efficient as possible. Which it is, it's a very efficient way of getting some kind of a food onto a table. Our processing's a bit different. It's very simple. We effectively simply pasteurise the milk very, very slowly. Just to give you a comparison of times here, for milk to pass through the very first stage of the process flow on the left to the very last stage, In the dairy itself, it takes between sort of 25 and 50 seconds, depending on the setup. In our one, it takes about 4 hours, and that's because we slowly batch pasteurise the milk, and we try and do everything we can to save the proteins and the fats within that milk and try and make it the most natural milk possible within Scottish law. So again, it's not just about milk at Mossgiel. We do have various different things that we do. However, back at the very start, I just didn't know which direction to go. So just to give you an example, when we lost £110,000, Mr. Bank Manager came along and said, "Very sorry, Bryce, you've no experience in farming, you've lost £110,000. You're a tenant farmer, so we're withdrawing all of your funding." So that gave me a £250,000 problem. So initially, I had to sell pretty much all of the cows we had, so I managed to retain 30 of them. 30 of them being Ayrshire cattle, which I'll come to in a few minutes. And we just basically had to sell everything. We had nothing left by the end of it. So we had to do something different, and we thought, how do we go forward? All we had was a small amount of savings I had left, which bought with pasteuriser. And I thought, we really have to do something different. This is an opportunity. We can get out of conventional dairying and do something very different. So the first thing we did was we became GM-free. So we stopped buying any genetically modified feed for the cattle. The reason that came about was very much to my dismay, after researching into what was happening with food, I found out that 1 million tonnes of genetically modified soya goes into cow feeding every year in the UK. But what I didn't realise was that there's not a consumer in this country who knows that unless they know the dairy industry. So it's something I felt, you'd always heard it in the news, genetically modified growing of crops is banned in the UK, but it's not in America, but we're actually still eating it and we don't even know. So I kind of felt that was something, it was a first step. I didn't really know about organic farming at that time, and in fact, just a couple of weeks before my father died, he said, "Bryce, for Christ's sake, there's 2 things you do not do in this farm. 1, you don't sell your milk directly, and he said, 2, for Christ's sake, don't go organic." So we went organic, of course. It was a real learning curve for it. I went out and I spoke to various farmers, lots of different farmers about going organic, visited a few farms, and they're always saying about, if you're thinking about going organic, you do the X, Y, and Z, you invest here, there, and everywhere, and I thought, I can't really do that, we just have to go for it. So everything I did, we've kind of done in a shoestring, we kind of did, cows just have to go outside and eat grass because there's nothing else to feed them, and that's pretty much it. So we went out and we kind of used that idea to go where we went. Now again, I said, Ayrshire cattle, we retained 30 of them. The story behind that is, when we lost all that money and everything was at risk, I started to think, where has it all went wrong? My grandfather in 1948 had 28 Ayrshire cattle, and he had a great living. He employed 6 people, he grew a family, my father had a family, and it's all went wrong in the past kind of 20 or 30 years. And I thought to myself, what's changed in the countryside? And I found that a lot of farms have stopped using Ayrshire cattle, and I kind of tried to think why that was, and the reasons were, they don't yield as much milk as a Holstein cow, which is the most common cow in the world for milk production. And their quality is very, very good. They're very good at turning grass into milk. However, a lot of farmers are moving away from that model and into more concentrate based because it's the cheapest way to get milk out of a cow. And I thought, let's go back, let's take a step back to 1948 when my grandfather was there with 30 cattle. We'll feed grass to our cows, we'll produce milk, sell it direct to the consumer. And that's what we did, and we're still using Ayrshire cattle today. We're back up to 65, which we're very proud of still to be there. We also use natural insemination for the cows, so it's bulls that we use, much to my dismay in August last year when I was hospitalised for 3 weeks with a dislocated shoulder and a punctured lung, but that's here or there. So we're still trying to do everything as naturally as possible, and I don't have a slide for this, but a year ago we made the decision to leave the calves with the mothers as well. So we're now a cow-calf dairy a year on, learning from many, many mistakes. It cost me a lot of money, but we're certainly getting there. And going out in the morning to see these calves and mothers together, it's something very different to what we got 5 years ago, certainly. And we are also now in the process of joining the Pasture for Life Association as well for being 100% grass-fed. We made that decision a year ago. We've learned, again, made a lot of mistakes that we've learned from. We've only been feeding grass for about a year now, bar a wobbly in November when I wasn't quite getting the growth from my calves that I wanted, but we're certainly getting there. We're speaking with Pasture for Life about accreditation, and that's where we want to be, and that's where we're going. It's all very much about the grass, as I just said. We are trying to get our farm right back to a more biodiverse farm. Sorry, I know I'm wobbling on a bit here, but this picture here, the reason I took this is that this field here was sprayed in 2014 by my father for Dokins, and this picture was taken about 18 months ago roughly, and it shows the margins of a field where there's a very biodiverse margin just in the kind of bottom left there. There's clovers, there is Dokins in there. I don't really care about the weeds, to be honest, but they're there. And the rest of it is still sterile, mono grasses that's there. I just feel that we really should be working towards something better and something more diverse in there that works more with nature to give us this sort of unique milk we're looking for. Of course, the other thing we've launched now is that just as of last week is something what we call our gold standard milk. When we first started Mossgiel, it was always just our cows, so it was just basically our cows. It was easy to keep all separate and tell everyone our story. Recently, we have invited 2 other farms to the story, so there's Drumsmodden Farm and Osley Bray. We actually keep all the milk separate, but it's part of our story. It's single origin farm, so every farm's got its own unique taste and unique flavour. And the reason we launched Gold Standard Milk is because our holistic vision is all to do with the history of the farm. So 200 years ago, a little over 200 years ago, the man that's in the front of our bottles there, Robert Burns, had farmed the farm. And I thought, how would he farm? So not just what my grandfather did, but what would Robert Burns do? So he would have fed grass because really there was nothing else to feed them. He would have left his calves with the mothers because milk powder wasn't invented in those days. The cows would have been all calving during the summer because that was the easiest time to do it because light bulbs hadn't been invented and candles weren't very good for milking cows too. And it's just, what would this be? There wouldn't be homogenisation or standardisation. It would be a very high cream content. You had Ayrshire cows, everything was there. So we thought, right, let's go for it. Let's do gold standard milk. Can't go at cold top for legal reasons, but gold standard. And that's where we are today. So it's full fat milk. It's always going to be that way. And we're going to continue to do that and see if we get the demand for it. Difference on the shelf, we ask for a 40p premium for it. The reason we're asking for this is we believe that everyone has a choice, and this country is shaped by the pound in your pocket. And if people want to support this way of farming, we can see that happening. We can then go out to other farms and say, look, this is what people want. Could you do this? Could you supply us milk? Could we be your platform? Because I appreciate not everyone's going to want to stand up here after they've been milking every day and try and sell milk. And that's the sort of vision we want, is to be the platform for other farmers to be able to change their ways and take the foot off the gas a little bit. And again, this is just to introduce to our farmers. This is Robert and Sarah Jane from Osley Bray, who are very much into what we're doing. They became organic at the same time as we did, and we're working with them to hopefully be the next cow calf dairy as well. And that's pretty much it. So, thank you very much.
Well, as they say, follow that. We've got 15 minutes till we finish, so we're just going to have a chance for people to ask some questions, but we really want it to sort of focus on this theme of, how do we get more of this? So I just want to ask you a question, a bit of audience participation. Do we think that what we've heard today from Deborah and Emery, and from Andrew, and from Rob, and from Denise, and from Bryce, and most of all from Wilma and David, do we think this is heading in the right direction? Do we think this is good? Come on, let's hear it. Yes. Okay, right. Do we want to see more of that happening? Yes. Okay, so the question is, how do you get more of that to happen? Is it all going to happen, as Bryce is saying, fantastic stuff, getting the neighbours to go organic, getting the neighbours to supply your milk, extending the market, right? Is that the best way of doing it? Do we need to do it through policy? So thoughts and questions to the panel on that topic. Yep, there's a gentleman here, Robert, I think it is.
Christopher Pitt, organic farmer. Question for Bryce. First of all, are you all grass-fed now?
Yes, we are now, yes.
What yield do you get out of each of your Ayrshire's?
At the minute, with the calves suckling the cows, we're only getting about 3,100 litres per cow.
If you didn't suckle, what do you reckon you would get?
About 3,008.
So it's about 700 litres you lose.
Yeah.
As a result of suckle.
Yeah.
Thank you.
We've got somebody here, Andrew here. Yep, just next to you, that's great.
It's a question to Ruth and Adele, to a lesser extent. You said that you liked and wanted to work with small groups of self-regulating farmers, which sounds like a very appealing concept, but other aspects of your presentation suggested that what you might be doing is simply feeding the better results that they produce into organizations controlled by corporate interests. And it seems to me that if you do that, are you not in danger of leaving people, i.e. citizens, enslaved to the ultimate mission of corporates to maximize shareholder value? So essentially greenwashing. And this really leads me to ask the question about the N word, because it seemed to me that all these very interesting benchmarking and initiatives to try and reconcile sustainability with economics always seems to stop short of human nutrition. We don't actually talk about the one thing that might make a difference, which is rewarding farmers for the number of people nourished per hectare, not the tons produced.
Thanks, Andrew. Ruth first, then Adele.
Yeah, it's a great. Can you hear me? Am I on? It's a great question, and so you build. I mean, I'm just being honest with you. You build a business by following the money. Small, self-organising groups of farmers can't afford to pay or couldn't afford to pay, and we've been trying to do this for 20 years. 20 years ago, the world was such a different place. Young people I work with today keep saying to me, Ruth, it's all so slow, it's so slow. I said, you should have been around 20 years ago. Nothing happened 20 years ago. But the momentum builds all the time. So the measures I'm talking about, this is why we developed this 3E structure. They take into account people, animals, and the environment. People is about the people that work in the industry, the food we eat, everything to do with people. So those measures take into account all of those things. And if these corporates, I'm not anti-corporates, I'm anti a lot of what they do, so we just need to put it on the table. So as long as the people are being looked after, but the measures will be there. So they cannot do poor wages, 0 hours contracts, and all those things that companies like McDonald's have been hauled up for. They have to do it properly, as do small farmers. And I want to say here and now, just because we're small as farmers, we run 2 small farms, one here and one in Brazil, just because we're small doesn't mean we're good either. So we've got to judge ourselves by the same parameters that we want to judge the bigger food industries by. But something like, depends what figures you talk about, but something like 80% of the food in the world is produced by what I would call small farmers. And by small farmers, I mean those farmers that are in control of their decisions and they see the effects of those decisions. And people that see the effects of those decisions do not do some of the things that are happening in the world, because they're connected to the people, they're connected to the land, they're connected to the animals. They see it, they live in the communities. Davy, I mentioned, he lives in the lakes. He lives in that community, he has chicken houses on his own farm. He just happens to be a leader who's developed an egg packing station and markets the eggs for them. So I don't know whether I'm answering your question, but the criteria is the same for any type. That's why I love this sort of idea of measuring. And it sounds complicated, but it's not. It's so simple. It's the willingness to do it. Am I answering your question? Not really, is it? And we love to hate these big companies. Let's not hate them. Let's focus on what needs doing in the world. And if they help us do that, great. If they don't, go on.
Just to pick up on your nutrition point, I completely agree. And one of the reasons why we decided to try and influence government on this is because we could see that a government is, as government does, very much with my Sustainable Food Trust hat on, develop things in silos. And so there was an environmental team, there was an animal welfare team, there was a public health, completely different department. And so we felt that there was a need to bring this holistic whole farm approach into this discussion. And I apologise for not having a chance to explain our summary table of metrics, but we included nutrition per acre or nutrition per hectare within both the livestock and plant management side of things. For the plant management side of things, using the BRICS test, both for animal nutrition and human health impact. But there may well be better measures out there, but we definitely feel it should be included.
Thank you. Yes, lady there with the check shirt.
So Bryce in particular, but there seems to be a whole theme throughout the conference today about looking back to an earlier time when we did things at a smaller level. And I'm wondering if that's a realistic option for us, or if we need to work, if that is the direction we're going in, or if we are going in a sort of post-industrial reimagining of farming. That
it's a small question for 5 to 5, but yeah, I'll let Bryce answer that.
No, absolutely. I truly believe it is realistic. I mean, we look to the past for a bit of inspiration about what we're trying to do, especially myself, about what we do at Mossgiel. However, the benefit we have nowadays is we've got the internet, we've got the modern technology to actually look at what we did in the past, realise the mistakes that we did, use our knowledge today to actually do things better. So, for example, you see examples all the time on the internet of farmers all around the world using biodynamic or holistic methods to try and grow more grass or more crops or raise their animals better, and you're seeing great examples of this all around the world. So we can learn from different farmers all over the place. We can do things differently. We can become smaller, take the foot off the gas a little, but produce the same amount of food. And I truly believe it is realistic for that, yeah.
Davy, are small farms in root health in Scotland?
And root health.
Yeah.
Well, with regard to your question, we're not looking to sort of hark back to ancient times sort of thing, but from a biodiversity perspective in particular, from an ecological perspective, it's important to actually understand what was it about those systems in the past that were actually integral to maintaining a wider range of biodiversity as we would describe it or want to, and then see how can you then fit that into existing systems, modify existing systems, but not necessarily split existing systems into 10 penny packets of individual sort of businesses. It's trying to actually work out what are the key elements that will actually drive whatever type of biodiversity you're actually interested in, and making sure they can be fitted into or adapted into the system itself.
Okay, we're going to take, I think, just 2 more questions. We've got 2 here, gentleman here first, and then we will come to you, Denise, so you can get the last question.
Hi, Peter Gregg from Piper's Farm down in Devon. Bryce, you're incredibly energetic and inspiring. It's your generation and exactly people like you who are going to revitalise the rural economy. Do you believe that digitalisation means we could repopulate the landscape with a vast range of enterprise so that farming becomes a much more exciting mix again, rather like your grandfather's era where 6 people were employed? Do you think that's a realistic vision to have for a digitalised landscape in the next 20 years?
Yes, I do. But it's a bit of a two-tiered answer. Yes, I do believe that. I believe that there's a lot of social media influencers out there that are certainly sexing up the countryside, if you like, and doing things a bit differently. The sort of issue to that is, on the flip side, we do need an easier way to get into the industry. As everyone in this room knows, it can be quite an old-fashioned industry at times in agriculture, and it can be quite difficult to get a foothold. So I think that through either policy or through a change in attitude, we need to sort of really try and get young people back into the countryside. And before, especially with the uncertainty of Brexit kicking about, we really need to watch what's happening here and do something about this and get people back onto farms. But yes, I do. I believe that social media and other mediums are certainly helping to get people back onto farms and really get the industry working again. Yeah.
And just to take on from that, and I can talk for Scotland about a whole load of things. We've got an upland research centre in the Highlands where we're actually practising what we call precision livestock farming, using a lot of innovations. But a lot of those innovations are actually just back to basics, good soil management, good grass management, but also seeing what elements of technology we can actually incorporate into that to ensure that extensive farmers who are pushed for time have the time and the ability to actually look and get more data on rather than managing a flock. As a flock, all animals are treated the same. Manage a flock of sheep as a group of individuals and manage according to those individual needs, so that their performance, their health and their welfare are actually improved. And if you actually, rural skills is highly important, and rural skills are undervalued in Scotland at the minute, certainly as far as sort of secondary school pupils and their teachers are concerned. And getting a plug in, if you want to buy the Press and Journal on Monday, my monthly column in it will talk about what we are doing to try and highlight rural skills in Scotland and the role that technology should play in that.
Thank you. Denise.
Is it on? Yeah. It's one for Ruth. You emphasise the need for measurement, and you also made the point that it's unacceptable to have any lameness or illness or whatever on the farm. The reality is that it happens, and you can have a wet year, and you can have a lot of scar on your cattle, and they'll be lame and look lame, and they might do on a dry year. So I'm curious to know where your measurement is placed in terms of acceptable and unacceptable welfare, considering that there are a whole lot of other factors that can affect things like lameness, which is a very visual indicator of animal welfare.
Yeah.
I'm just not convinced by what you're saying?
Okay, so we have in our business, so this is what I'm saying, we've got 20 years of experience and massive data sets that are largely, sadly, still confidential from big retail companies and their supply chains. The difference between the good and the bad is massive, massive. So I'll give you one example. The M&S fresh milk supply chain, I've been together for, God, it must be 20 years now, long time. They're mostly high-yielding cows. They've got extremely low levels of lameness because they've been working with a veterinary surgeon in cow comfort for a very long time, who's a leader in his field. And they've had the money because they've had the premium. So it can be done. But the other end of the scale is more extensive farmers that have very low levels of lameness. So it's the levels, yes, and it's a benchmarking thing, and it's putting it into the public arena. So that's all I would say. Yes, I'm not expecting anybody to have zero. All I'm really saying is I think the levels in many herds, most herds I might even say in the country, are unacceptable, can be much better, and it's the mental attitude that it's not normal. Temple Grandin, for anybody who knows Temple Grandin's work, you know, her big statement is bad becomes normal. And then, you know, I've even done it myself. I can think of years gone by when I did it myself. Lame sheep were normal. We have a program on our farm now. Lame sheep are an exception. It's not normal to have lame sheep on our farm because there's a 5-point plan. If you implement it, you don't get lame sheep or very many of them. So that's why I like measures, because then what it says is this is the best, and then the best can benchmark themselves against the worst, or the other way around, and then you can think, well, Freddie's doing it, I must be able to do it, and then you look at what Freddie's doing.
Non-lameness is normal for most farms because it actually goes against the interests of the farmer if there's any lameness.
Lameness in dairy cows in this country is, well, I don't know, somebody probably in the room knows the figure.
Oh, sheep and suckers.
Yeah, it's massive. Yeah, in Layton.
What we farm pigs, you know, lameness is very unusual.
Yes, in pigs. In sheep and cattle, no, sadly. Dairy cattle and sheep, sadly not. Yeah.
Okay, thank you very much. I've been asked by David and Wilma, I think. What do you David said I had the last word, but you.
Yeah, absolutely.
But you can have the last word.
No.
Right. He asked me to do two things. One, where he asked me to try and sum up the day. I'm not going to try and cover everything, or we'll be here all night, but I'm going to about 5 points to make. First thing is, this isn't the start of a journey, but it's been a really good opportunity, I think, to take stock of where we are and where we need to go. Mary made a fantastic point about we're a connecting sort of herd. We want to be connected with each other and we want to be connected with nature. And food is the most fantastic connector we have to advance the cause of human connection with ourselves and with nature. So thank you, Mary, for that. All of the speakers, I think, uniformly talked about management. Right? That is the scarcest resource we have. Right? All of the systems we heard about are very actively managed. They're not laissez-faire systems. And what we need, if we're going to take this forward, is both the values about why this matters, but also the skills to do it. And as Davy says, there's a huge skills agenda here, because this isn't easy to do. If it was easy to do, everybody would be doing it. Okay? Third thing is about the lag. We heard a lot today about where's the research. There's always a lag between the pioneers and the rest, by definition. And always there's a stranded asset base of research and common sense, so-called, which is on the other side of the river. That's where it mostly is. So you're always going to be, as Nick pointed out this morning, slightly odd. And you're going to be slightly odd for a little while to come, I'm afraid. Right? But some of those assets will move across the river. Right? And the research agenda will come into this space because the climate and the environment demands that to happen. We need to find better ways of doing this. We need a farming and a food system which delivers on nutrition and biodiversity and the climate and human welfare. Fourth thing I want to say is that pioneers, by definition, are stubborn folk. Otherwise, they'd stay home, right? And stubborn folk are not given to agreement, not even with each other, right? So, as Deborah said, the most important thing we can do is to be inclusive and to keep the big tent open. Wilma and David and the rest of us who've been involved in organising the conference worked really hard to make sure that some of the people who came here weren't people who already agreed with us. We tried to keep the door open and welcome in people from farming organisations and farming interests who maybe think that, you know, we're away with the fairies, okay? we'd like more of them to have come, and we'd like more of them to come next time, because we've got to keep this dialogue open. We're not going to move forward if we think we've got it all right and we have nothing more to learn. And so we have to have that dialogue going forward. Okay, and what goes with that is that as more people start to farm in a more integrated way, then the new customers, as Davy said, always get a better deal than the existing customers. So when it's easier for the next lot of people to do what some people here have spent 20 or 30 years of their life trying to make happen, we just have to be very generous and say, that's just great, okay? But you've pushed through the brambles, right? Other people can walk, you know, the path of dalliance. But if pioneers didn't go through the brambles, nobody would. Okay, so that's some of the things I've taken from today. We have time to hear what everybody else has taken from today. I hope that you go away with questions, and with questions that have a question in them. There's a lot of work to be done here. But before we close, I want to say a couple of things about today. We have had the most amazing food. You know, I go to a lot of food conferences, and most of them, nobody thinks about the food, and you get some beige stuff, which may or may not have been derived, as Zoe said, from the Eat Well Played guide, but it isn't very appetizing. It's got nothing to do with the subject that we're talking about. We've had endless farm tours today. I don't know, Davy's tractor must be worn out, and his voice must be worn out, taking people around on farm tours. How often do you get that? We've had a fantastic support today from the whole Cream of Galloway team, and a legion of volunteers, and the people doing the AV, and the people, I mean, just everything's worked because Cream of Galloway pulled out all the stops to make it work, and that's fantastic. We've had an amazing set of speakers and facilitators today, a really packed program, and it's not surprising we've been running late most of the day. That's inevitable. And we've also had just an extraordinary sense of hospitality and welcome here, being welcomed onto this farm. Now, there are not a lot of people who could put on an event like today, right? There are not a lot of people who could put on an event like today. But I think there are only 2 people in the world who could put on an event like today while they're also running one of the most innovative dairy farms in Europe, and, by the way, commissioning a new cheese factory to open tomorrow. So I want to hear it now for David and Wilma.